Hi, Acharya Fleet Mall here for Shambhala Mountain Center. Welcome to day 2 of the Reality Summit. And I'm here with the worldwide known Dharma teacher, Sharon Salzberg, a friend and colleague. I'm very happy to be here with you today, Sharon. Welcome.
I'm very happy to be here with you. Thank you.
Yeah, this is going to be really fun. So Reality Summit, that could be another word for the Dharma, really seeing things with clear eyes. What is reality? And today, in day 2, we're kind of focusing on reality and then some of the obscurations that show up, or the illusions or delusions, or the ways that we just obscure relating with things simply the way they are, and instead get caught up in a lot of conditioned reactionary relationships and dramas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think Sharon Salzberg needs very little introduction, if anybody, if anyone, if any at all, sorry. But really one of the pioneering Dharma teachers in the West, who teaches all over the world, and well known for her classic work on loving kindness, the book Loving Kindness, as well as her newer books, Real Love. And what was the name of the book about work?
Real Happiness at Work.
Real Happiness at Work, right. And your most recent book is Real Love, is that correct?
That's right.
And we're going to be focusing on that a little bit today. So again, welcome, Sharon.
Thank you.
We'll jump right in. So with so much suffering in our world today, I mean, maybe we're just more aware of it, but we're certainly aware of suffering all over the world, both that's caused by all kinds of social, cultural stuff, political stuff, international problems, as well as seemingly increasing number of natural disasters, climate change, and so forth. Here in the U.S., the home of Shambhala Mountain Center, the recent events of Charlottesville and the resurgence of hate speech and hate crimes, and it's all very troubling. And in light of that, it almost seems a little bit out of touch maybe to be talking about the innate goodness and real love at the heart of human nature. So what would you have to say about that?
Well, I'm a New Yorker, so it's a stretch for me too. I think I tend not to so much talk about innate goodness or the real love at the heart of human nature, but a capacity for real love and that kind of innate goodness at the heart of who we are. And because the teaching, is presented in the Theravada tradition of Buddhism, which is where I primarily studied, was that we all have a capacity for clarity, for understanding, for love, for connection, for peace. And it may and likely is quite covered over and hidden from view and hard to find and hard to trust, but it's there as a capacity, as a potential. And nothing we've been through, nothing we may yet go through can actually destroy it as a capacity. And so it's on that basis that we actually do practice. Because if it were like planting a seed in a rock, it wouldn't make no sense, right? Mm-hmm. But it's because we have that potential. And I always found that kind of a breathtaking view of human nature, mm-hmm. that no matter what, we have that capacity. Because I think that is true. And even if you've done terrible things, or you've been through terrible things, I think that capacity is intact. And to sort of talk about innate goodness as though we're a reified place, almost like a thing, I think is very, very confusing for people because, look at how we woke up this morning. Mm-hmm. Puerto Rico is still drowning and people are starving there because they can't get food or water, and, gun violence in Las Vegas. And it's just, you can reel, from mm-hmm. Just the onslaught of suffering that's everywhere. And, it's one thing when you consider it maybe from a natural disaster. It's another thing when it's a natural disaster compounded by people not caring, or maybe years of keeping our heads in the sand, trying to pretend this is not happening, whatever. It's very difficult to hang in there and try to see one's way through and to have, a commitment to not kind of buying into a yet more corrosive sense of self and other and us and them, and really not only trying to find a way through, but a way through that's different than the very mind states that seem to have caused the problems.
Mm-hmm. One way that maybe we could talk about this, we're all trying to get our needs met, even when we're doing so in benevolent and relatively enlightened ways. We're trying to get our needs met for food, warmth, and shelter, for connection, relationship, autonomy, respect, love, and so forth. And then some of us, because of our life circumstances, are trying to get our needs met with strategies that are not so helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, probably not so helpful to ourselves, and certainly not helpful to others, or even extremely harmful. So I wonder if you could maybe talk from that perspective of looking at how this, whether we see it as a potential for goodness or full-blown, however we see it, how does it get obscured, and how do people get caught up in these not so helpful strategies?
Well, I mean, I think that's almost like the primary question. If you do believe, as out of the Buddhist teaching, that everybody wants to be happy, mm-hmm. and not happy in a kind of self-indulgent, mm-hmm. way, but everybody wants a sense of belonging somewhere. Everybody wants a sense of finding a home somewhere in this body, in this mind, with one another on this earth. We all really long for happiness, and that longing is correct. It's not a problem. It's not something to be ashamed of or feel squeamish about. In a way, everyone should be happy, and the problem is ignorance, that we often don't have a clue where real happiness is to be found, and we are taught so many myths and downright lies about what's really going to be onward leading. Like one kind of prevalent cultural norm I feel these days is the idea that if we only put other people down enough, we'll feel better about ourselves. And you see it in entertainment, you see it in reality TV. Somebody made me, for example, watch a cooking show once, and as somebody was being let go of, it wasn't like the judge said, your souffle was good, but not really that, adventurous. Maybe try more spices or something. It was like, take your knives and go. It was like completely, you don't deserve to be alive, And I thought, God, we watch that on TV. We call it entertainment. And it's like, and we're taught, you do more of that, you'll feel better about yourself. But is that true? There's so many things like that are part of our conditioning, personal, familial, cultural. Mm-hmm. And one of the great things I found about meditation practice is you get to question all of that. You get to take a good, honest look at, is that really strong? Is vengefulness, hour after hour after hour obsessing about someone's harmful act that you can't change anyway? Is that really strong? Is compassion really weak? It's another thing we're often taught. That kindness, compassion is really like a secondary virtue. People will take advantage of you. You'll end up like a doormat. You'll lose your edge. You won't be, intense anymore. But is that true? Let's take a look. So we have that miraculous opportunity to really question everything and take a look for ourselves. Because really, when you compile the list, for any one person, wow, I was taught that, and I believe that, and it's a lot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad and you did before, bringing it back to our own experience and how we can work with that. We even do a lot of enemy making towards ourselves. We're beating up on ourselves and splitting ourselves and wanting to get rid of one part, wanting to idealize another part. And we're often really at war with ourselves in some way. And so that really, if we're going to change how we're relating with the world, changing how we're relating in here seems to be a good place to start, right?
Yeah.
So, there's a kind of neurotic level of obscuration that we're all dealing with. And then there's, some obscuration that gets even thornier and creates more harmful behaviors and may have to do with serious childhood traumas and other damage and so forth. And also even just a strong influence of this pervasive cultural negativity and cynicism that's so everywhere these days that we're talking about. So, if we're self-reflective enough to be aware that we have a lot of this stuff, and that sometimes we're getting triggered into strong emotional states and wanting to react with hatred or vengeance or anger or enemy making, how do we work with that? Is it ever going to change? I mean, we could be mindful of it, but will it ever change, or how do we work with it?
Well, I think the mindfulness of it will change it all by itself over time. The way we use the word mindfulness is, and actually, it's actually a compound. It's mindfulness, clear comprehension, sati sampajanya, because you see into the nature of things as you pay attention. And so, just as one example, years ago, I read in the New York Times that there was an article about this pilot program, one of the first programs bringing mindfulness into schools. And this was a 4th grade classroom. So the kids are like 9 or 10 years old. So they asked one of these kids, what is mindfulness? And he said, mindfulness means not hitting someone in the mouth. That's what mindfulness means. And I thought, that is a great definition of mindfulness.
Absolutely.
Because, first of all, it implies you're feeling angry as you're starting to feel angry. Not after you've sent the email, and after you've lashed out. But as it's beginning, because you're that in touch. And then it implies a certain balanced relationship to the anger. It's like if you just fall into every state and you lose your center and you get overcome, and you'll probably hit a lot of people in the mouth, because life can be really frustrating. But at the same time, if you hate what you're feeling and you're ashamed of it and you're freaked out about it and you try to deny it and you try to repress it, you get tighter and tighter and tighter until you explode. So we say mindfulness is like that place in the middle where you're not sucked into everything and you're not at the same time pushing it away. And you can understand it better. You can understand yourself better. There's like some space that happens there in which maybe you see options. Maybe you think, I hit someone in the mouth last week. Didn't work out that well. Let me try this. It doesn't mean you never act, but it's like creativity. There's possibility in that space. And so mindfulness will do a lot in terms of understanding those obscurations. So you see, I have been down this road 70 billion times. It got me nothing. I don't think I'll go there. And it's not like an act of contempt towards yourself or violence. It's like out of the deepest compassion for yourself, you think, I've been there. Let me try this. Yeah. And so I think the world really opens up for us the more we practice mindfulness. But you have to be able to sit there with the anger. That's not that easy. And, not taking any of those extremes.
Yeah, it's certainly not that easy. So to be able to sit with that anchored in our body and our breath and so forth. And then even as we're aware of some of these more difficult mind states and habitual patterns, to not then get caught up in pushing that away or demonizing ourselves or saying, I like this, I hate that. But it seems like to be able to be mindful of it in a way that leads to the freedom to make a different choice.
Yeah.
There has to be some level of friendliness or acceptance or some compassionate context to the way that we're mindful of these things. Otherwise, being more aware of my stuff could just make me more upset. Right, exactly. I mean, I don't know if we'd call it mindful anymore, but you could, call anything mindful these days. It's everywhere. But yes, I think there definitely has to be that balance, and part of that balance is a certain non-condemning quality, and it's kindness. We need a kind of compassionate sense of, this is not calling this state bad or wrong or terrible, realizing this is painful. To have this much anger come up and this much fear, it's painful. Well, how do we begin to shift that that internal relationship with ourselves to one of being kinder? Because, for many of us, I think we've just been so unkind to ourselves for so long. It's so habitual. And how do I can tell myself, okay, I got to be kinder to myself, and I'm going to sit here and try to be kind to myself. But how do we actually shift that tendency to beat ourselves up and to say, well, I like that thing because my experience says that maybe the world will, stroke me for that. The world will respond well to that. But, I hate this stuff because it always gets me in trouble and it embarrasses me and I'm ashamed of it. And, Well, it's practice. It's practice. There's no pill. You can't just. Maybe there is a quick answer here. It's practice. The best thing about some of the opportunities available to us is that we can also practice in the community, and
or with teachers, and it's such a reminder. It's not just me,
Right.
This is part of what people go through. And that gives us kind of inspiration to keep going. But it's almost like a muscle, It's like my teachers talk about the letting go muscle, but we talk about the kindness muscle.
Mm-hmm.
You see yourself railing against yourself because you're feeling a certain state. And you remind yourself, first of all, could I have stopped this? Because in fact, we cannot control what arises in our minds. We can affect how we are with it. But you can't insist, like, I'm never going to be afraid again, or,
Mm-hmm.
this will never come up again. I mean, you can do things to make it less likely, perhaps, but you can't insist, right? I'm never going to fall asleep meditating again or whatever, because those combination of conditions comes together, something will arise. And, we can understand that's reality. I mean, that's part of it, is understanding what's real. Or another way of saying it, I have one Tibetan teacher, Sonny Rinpoche, who I study with, and he wrote a book called, I think it's Open Heart, Open Mind, something like that. And in it, he tells the story about being in Singapore. And it was one of those structures where it was like two extremely tall buildings that are connected by a glass bridge up on some high floor. Mm-hmm. And he was with, he was with a monk from his home one day, and they started walking across that bridge in Singapore to get from one building to the other. And the monk just went across, and Sonny Rinpoche basically had a panic attack as he started. He took a couple of steps and he couldn't go any further. And he was panicked. He was really afraid. And he tried to talk himself out of it, like he'd look at two people walking across together and he'd say, well, it's two people, I'm only one. It didn't crumble with them, it's not going to crumble with me, or you look at all these people, they're going across and, nobody's like scared. I shouldn't feel what I'm feeling. Mm-hmm. And then he'd take another few steps and he couldn't do it. So he'd back up, and he thought at one point he was going to have to go down like in the elevator, cross the street and go up. Mm-hmm. And there was the monk, waving like from the other place, happy as can be, and like, what's going on with you? And finally he said, in relating to his own mind, he said to himself, what I'm feeling is real, but it's not true. It's real in the sense of this is my actual experience in the moment. Mm-hmm. Instead of trying to pretend I don't feel this is what I feel. But it's not true in that it's not reflecting a deeper reality. It's a construct. It's something that's being made up for whatever reason. And with that, he could walk across. So we have to honor what we feel. I mean, it's sort of, I shouldn't feel what I'm feeling, I think is too far. That's really unfair to ourselves. But at the same time, we can tell, if we look clearly, if something is reflecting a deeper reality, or if it's just like an old voice, an old tape or something like that.
Mm-hmm. That's a really helpful distinction, because I think it's very difficult to be in the midst of intense feelings and intense emotions and not have those validated or have someone try to invalidate those. And yet, sometimes our emotional states are not based on anything related to what's currently true. They're, like you said, old tapes of some kind. And at the very least, it's always a partial truth. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so if we can have it, if some sense of initial validation from ourselves, or that's a compassion, and then maybe that allows us to be curious. Okay,
that's right.
Well, is that all that's going on here, or what else is going on?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I was thinking about all the things you were saying, and I'm reminded, of course, of your first, I don't know if it was your very first book, but the book Loving Kindness.
Yeah, this is my first book.
Which focused on the metta practice, the loving kindness practice. And that's certainly a way with practice to gradually shift that internal landscape to be a bit kinder toward ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. We say that mindfulness practice helps us see the difference between our direct experience and the story we are starting to weave about it,
Mm-hmm.
And loving kindness practice helps change our default story.
Very
So if we've largely been motivated, say, by fear in what we do or what we say or what we hold back from doing or saying, and we do loving kindness practice, we'll find that we are largely motivated by a sense of connection.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be this glorious, engulfing love, as we like to think of it, but it is a profound sense of connection.
Mm-hmm. I found some of the information coming out of, all the current neuroscience and neuropsychology and so forth, and ideas like the negativity bias and things like that to be very helpful to find out that the human condition is really a setup for living a fear-based life, unless we do something proactive to change our default mode to be a little less fearful, a little kinder, and so forth. And that, I think, helpful and hopeful.
Yeah, no, definitely. Because I think one of the things people feel somewhat squeamish about in terms of practice is the intentionality of it. Intentionality doesn't have to mean grasping or clinging, but to realize, okay, I have certain habits. I'm sort of stuck in a rut in the way I pay attention. I meet someone, I don't really listen to them. I look through them. I'm very preoccupied with my email or whatever it is, or I have certain biases against certain kinds of people, and I don't really listen, when I meet that kind of person or whatever it is, to realize there's certain ways my attention, the way I pay attention, has been contoured by force of habit, and I'm going to stretch. I'm going to see what it's like to pay attention differently, not in a phony way, like I love everybody, in some weird make-believe way, but more differently, if I tend to be distracted meeting a stranger, what's it like to really pay attention, and not to be composing email in your head. And if I tend to look through people I feel don't count, the person who serves me in the supermarket or something like that, what's it like to look at them instead of look through them? Or if I think about myself at the end of the day and I pretty well only think about the mistakes I made and the things I did wrong, what's it like to ask myself, like, anything else happened today? Like anything good? So it's like this continual kind of stretching just to see what's it like.
Yeah, it seems it's really a quality of space, in a sense, that the more mindfulness and compassion, the mindful self-compassion that we can bring to ourselves, and it just allow more space and more awareness of this whole internal landscape. We're less caught in it, and therefore there's more possibility. And we were talking about needs before, and when our basic needs for love and connection and relationship and inclusion and food, warmth, when all that's getting met, we have mostly positive emotions, right? And when our needs feel threatened, or we perceive that they're threatened in some way, we start to have all the difficult emotions, even things like envy and jealousy and hatred. And so understanding there's this whole internal landscape in there between us and these emotions and the seeming outside triggering events, I think empowers us to, see, well, where do I have the choices in there? And even recognizing that, that it's not even necessarily true whether my needs are not getting met. There's perception involved, and then there's narratives and conditioning and old stories, and there's so much going on there.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank goodness for mindfulness, right?
So, you mentioned clinging and attachment a moment ago, and those are often framed in kind of a negative way in the Dharma and the Buddhist traditions. But it also seems that, attachment is really important in terms of relationship and creating cohesive social fields and community and being able to live without being, having really good attachments with would put us even a more fear-based place. So can you talk a little bit about this distinction around attachment? And I think it brings up a lot of confusion for people. We think that I'm going to live on an island as this non-attached, enlightened person. I won't need anything or anybody, and then I'll finally be enlightened.
Yeah, I think it does bring up a lot of confusion. And I think especially these days because of attachment theory and Western psychology, where the thing you want is secure attachment. The last thing you want is like no attachment, and
Right.
I honestly think it's a different use of the word, like sometimes in trying to understand attachment in the Buddhist sense, I substitute the word control. Or I think about, first of all, I should say, when we say something's negative, it means it causes suffering in that context, right? Not that you're a bad person. Is that my street or your street?
I think it's sure.
Okay.
You're in New York, right?
I'm in New York. Yeah.
I'm out in the country.
Okay. It's my street. To say you're filled with attachment doesn't mean you're like this wretch, this lowly wretch. It means you're probably on a path to suffering and causing suffering. Mm-hmm. So let's take a look at the consequences of that state. So I sometimes call non-attachment a state of honor. It's not the way we usually use the word, but it's like if you go to a meeting, for example, and somebody's like totally fixed, they've got like a big, big agenda they're trying to prove, and maybe a dilemma is presented and there are 90 possibilities for ways to work it out, but there's only the one that they see and nothing else is good enough. It's like real tunnel vision, real narrowness of perspective, really being fixated, being stuck. That's what I'm calling attachment. And so non-attachment doesn't mean you have no point of view or that you don't care. It means you're able to listen, right? You have a flexibility and an openness of mind so you can see how things work out. And in human relationships, we need bonding, we need caring, we need a sense of being seen. We need a sense of being able to see others. They're not so opaque. That's connection. And I would call attachment an extra thing we do when we're trying to be in control. We insist someone not change. We insist we not change, that things can only work out this one little narrow way, and it causes a lot of suffering. I do think it's just like a different way of using the word.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know I think in the Theravada tradition, in particular your tradition, you talk about the near enemies of certain qualities.
Yeah.
The near enemy of non-attachment is indifference, if I'm not mistaken. So there is that idea that it can go too far and then become something different.
Yeah, the near enemy of equanimity is indifference. Yeah.
Of equanimity is indifference.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, but the way we use equanimity, I think, is a little different than in the Mahayana, because it is about balance, and so it's like non-attachment, not aversion, And the near enemy is a state that is close enough on the surface to masquerade as a state we want to cultivate, but it's really very, very different when we take a look. So a lot of desirable states or things we want to work toward would be described as having a near enemy. Like, don't be confused, don't be fooled. So the near enemy of equanimity is indifference.
It seems helpful along the path to at some point develop some confidence that, or at least entertain the possibility that we have this capacity for goodness, or this capacity for love and compassion. And, we might every now and have a moment of deep letting go, or a moment where we spontaneously act in a compassionate or altruistic way, and we go, oh, there's my goodness. I have some, thank goodness I have goodness. But is there a way to really, more discover our basic goodness and humanity right in the midst of all the gnarly stuff that we go through every day?
I think we discover it just through the fact that we can try, that we can sit down to meditate. Not that we have some glorious experience while we're meditating, but the fact that we see a possibility, like in that moment, we've expressed something really good. Like one of my teachers used to say, the most important moment of your meditation practice is the moment you sit down to do it. Because in that moment you were saying something about believing in yourself, believing in possibility of change. After that, anything might happen, but that first moment is like the purest moment of, kind of assertion. And I think what's coming to my mind is actually something I put in my book, Faith. I wrote a book on faith, getting off the love track for a book or two, but it was on faith. And I tell the story in the book about sitting with a psychiatrist in New York having a discussion. And the topic of the discussion was, what is the single most healing element in the psychotherapeutic relationship? As though there were just one, but that was the conversation. And he said, if you put any good psychotherapist up against the wall, they'd have to say it was love. It's the love in the room that's the single most healing element. And then I just heard these words come out of my mouth, and what came out of my mouth was, well, for all we know, the single most healing element is the fact that someone showed up for their appointment. And that's how I was defining faith, right? Moving out of that whatever sense of being on the margins to let me show up, right? That movement, that something is stirred inside of us. And for all we know, that is true, right? So it's something around that, like we can see, I had miserable sitting, but I sat, I have no concentration, but I kept returning to the object of awareness or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, then not giving up, and the faith. I like that. Really, there's a need for faith, I think, in our practice. And my teacher, Saka Mipam Rinpoche, talks about that quite a bit. And sometimes he kind of just almost in a light way refers, well, people wouldn't have been doing this for several thousand years all over the world if it didn't work. There's got to be something to it. It's lasted this long, right? And it's not easy. It's not like entertainment. I mean, if it was entertaining and all fun, you go, okay, that's why people are doing it. But it's actually kind of challenging and kind of boring a lot of time, and people are still doing it. So there must be something to it.
Yeah, it's true.
I wanted to bring up, I've been bringing this up when I have the opportunity of late. It's someone I ran into in light of what's been going on post-Charlottesville and everything else that's going on, the Black Lives Matter movement and all of the violence against young black men, the tragic police shootings and all the rest of it. Just this resurgence of hate and really difficult political discourse. I ran into, I don't know if you've run across this, but he's an African-American, I think was well known before as kind of a slam poet, and his name is Theo E.J. Wilson. And I'm not exactly sure how he decided to do this, but he initiated, I think, a very courageous experiment. He developed an online persona for a white supremacist and began engaging in the online dialogue with other white supremacists, even some famous ones. And it was very daunting for him, and as you can imagine, quite scary initially. And of course, everything he was hearing was abhorrent to him, especially as a black man, and very threatening. But he also found that, just getting there and expressing this stuff, against liberals and against this and against that, there was something exhilarating about doing it, even though he didn't believe in it, right? And so he gradually was starting to tap into something about what's going on with their energy. And in the end, what he ended up discovering and being very surprised was that despite, really having a strong desire that these people would change the way they think and get a bigger view about life, that he could see their humanity. He could kind of understand, for many of them, the circumstances they came from, what they've been exposed to so far in life. He could kind of get where they were coming from and how they got to be in that mindset. And that was quite shocking and both encouraging to him. He said, it's not like I have endless compassion for somebody that wants to wish me off the planet. But at the same time, he could see something in their humanity. And I thought that was just astounding and so brave. Mm-hmm. But, this ability to get beyond enemy with ourselves and with others, to see our own humanity and see others' humanity, even in the midst of all this gnarly stuff. that we're all dealing with.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic, and it takes a real willingness to experiment and to kind of reformulate where is strength, you know, because you also don't want to ever contemplate giving in, you know, because that kind of self-denial, you know, it's like too out of balance. And not only is it negating your own worth as a being, you know, your own innate dignity, but it's opening the door for more and more and more people to be hurt, you know. So there's something about having a commitment to continue to try to remake the world into a more enlightened place, but not coming from a place of hatred.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been traveling around giving a series of talks called Beyond Enemies, Sacred Outlook and Social Transformation. And the theme of the talk, especially post-Charlottesville, but even before that was, you know, a lot of us of a kind of spiritual bent, maybe, we sometimes hear people say, well, I'd rather be for things than against something. I want to be for love. I want to be for peace. I don't want to be against, you know, and of course, many activists would think that's a bit weak-minded and that sometimes we just have to take a stand against things. And, you know, today it does seem that not being willing to take a stand against certain things might be a lack of bravery. So how do we step up and take a stand against hatred, against racism, against bigotry without falling into, you know, more divisive violence and aggression ourselves? That seems to be a real challenge, but one that we can't shrink from.
Yeah. I mean, I agree completely. It is a real challenge, and it is our challenge, you know. So thank goodness we have one another, you know, just to think these things through.
Well, we're going to explore that challenge together in a retreat setting at Shambhala Mountain Center, August of 2018, not so far away. And it's called Compassion in Action. And I'm really looking forward to co-leading this retreat with you. And we're going to have some other wonderful teachers there. And it's going to be a strong practice retreat in beautiful Shambhala Mountain Center up in the Rocky Mountains. And if people haven't been there, it's a fabulous, magical place. And we'll do a lot of practice, but we're also really going to explore those kinds of questions. How do we speak truth to power? How do we take a stand against, you know, the resurgence of hate speech and racism and bigotry that we see now even in the public square? They used to be kept on the margins somewhat, but seems so right out front now. So how do we take a stand against that and not get caught up in our own fear and aggression and all the rest of it? So I think that's going to be a safe place to go deep in exploring that together.
Yeah, I think it's fantastic. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if you could maybe just invite us into either a question or a little brief reflection that might kind of help nudge us in this direction of working with ourselves in a real way, so that we can get in relationship with reality without giving in to cynicism about how things are, or even how we are.
Well, I mean, I think it is a series of questions, and it's not to ask ourselves sort of the questions in rapid fire sequence, but in reflection as we sit with ourselves, like, where does strength lie? You know, where does real happiness lie? And then how alone am I really? And as, you know, you just sit and sit with your experience of listening to sirens or whatever's happening, and various things will arise, you know, annoyance, shame. I mean, it's a siren, you know, why am I annoyed? Someone's in that ambulance. Whatever it might be, just hold those things in that perspective. Like, you know, is this really strong, or is this weakening?
Well, thank you so much, Sharon, and great to hang out with you a bit today and get a little flavor of New York City there with the sirens in the background. I hope whoever those sirens are about or for I hope it will turn out okay, or the best it can. And again, I really look forward to the Compassion in Action retreat with you next summer. And wish you all the best in your travel and teachings. And thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much.